Hey, Zach Driscoll here from Trinity Young Adults. Just wanted to say thank you for taking the time to listen to the podcast. I hope it's blessed you. Over the summer, we are recording the podcasts that we're doing in a live setting and posting them for people to hopefully grow in their relationship with the Lord, and also use that then to go out in the relationships that they have around them and to bless and to serve and to minister to the people in their lives. Enjoy the podcast.
All right, so we kind of almost went into this at the end. So you were talking about, you asked Zach, did Jesus ever sin? So my question for you, did Jesus have anxiety?
Yes. So I'll ask you a question. We're going to do this.
Here we go.
Since we're old friends. So I'll ask you two questions. Zach knows the answer because he grew up at my dining room table. And then I'll answer your question. But you got to remind me because I'm 53 and I'll forget. So Did Jesus ever sin?
No.
Okay, good. That wasn't a trick question. And so did he ever make a mistake or learn through trial and error?
Yes. Did he?
I'm asking you.
I mean, if Jesus was fully human as well as fully God, then he would have to learn. He grew up. He started out as a baby. So did he learn through trial and error? I'd say yes.
Yes. So everybody give Emma a round of applause. So you are not a heretic, and that's good. And so we think of this way. Everybody's like, Jesus is perfect, which he was and is. He never did sin. But it says in Luke 2 that he grew in wisdom, stature, and favor with men and God. And so that means is he figured it out by doing it. And as a human being, we figure it out by doing it. So like growing up, Zach was a baseball player. And what happened when you first saw a curveball and you tried to hit it?
Hit a bomb.
No,
it's a lie.
No, you almost fell down. I was there. And so the first time you go hit a curveball, you're like, I've never seen one of those. Now you got to learn what to do with a curveball. How many of you, first time they put you behind the wheel of a car, it didn't go great? You're like, I got to figure this out. And so there's a difference between sinning and being human. And sinning is where you violate one of God's laws. Being human is where you figure it out by doing it, and sometimes you do it wrong, and then you do it right. And so sometimes what parents do when they're raising Christian kids, there's so much pressure to be perfect, but they're not allowed to be human. And so there was a line at our house with the kids, and that is, that wasn't a sin, that was a mistake.
That's good.
You know, and so I would never discipline the kids for mistakes.
Yeah.
So I'll give you guys an example. So we were at Red Robin when the kids were little, and next to us there was a family sitting around the table, and I don't know if the parents were on their phone or what. They weren't paying attention. The waitress obviously never had a child because they brought all the drinks for the little kids in the open big cups filled with ice that are sweating and slick, and you're like, I know how this ends.
Oh, no.
Everybody's wearing Coke. You know, that's the way it's going to go. Because if you're a parent, you're like, they need a lid on that. So, you know, one of the kids, it got their big, maybe it's a root beer. They got the root beer. They picked it up. It drops, falls, spills all over. Parent gets upset, disciplines the kid. Should you discipline the kid? Did they sin?
No.
No. Maybe you spank the waitress or waiter, you know, because they brought the kid a cup. I mean, you've got a little boy. What happens if you give him a cup with no lid on it?
He's got an impressive reach. His arms are this long, but if I put a plate, we went to sushi today for dinner. I put a plate of wasabi this far away, and he grabbed it. Yeah, he doesn't like spicy food.
Yeah, but that's not a sin. He's learning. He's figuring it out. Like if he did this, he would now have his discipleship moment with wasabi.
Yep.
And so, you know, part of it is if it's always about don't make any mistakes, don't do anything wrong, you're not allowed to be a human being.
Yeah.
And sometimes kids that grow up in a religious environment, it's like, you know, Jesus was perfect. God wants you to be perfect. It's like, I thought I needed Jesus because I wasn't perfect. But also, too, like, it's not a sin to make mistakes. It's not a sin to be human. It's not a sin to figure it out. You're like, well, I tried and it didn't go well, so I learned from that, do it again. But sometimes when you grow up in a perfectionistic environment, a performance environment, Some parents will be really heavy-handed with grades, like, you need to get straight A's. It's like, it's not a sin to get a B, you know? And, you know, if it was me in math, like, B would have been a miracle, you know? And some parents are really strict on, like, sports. Like, you need to compete. You need to make varsity. You need to da-da-da. You need to make the starting team. You need to make select. And they put all this pressure on their kids. They're like, did they get to be human?
Yeah.
Did they get to make mistakes? Did they get to learn by trial and error? And I think what that contributes to, I think that contributes to a whole generation of anxiety. And it's like, I'm not allowed to be human. I need to do everything right the first time, and I'm not allowed to make a mistake. It's like, well, then you're going to have anxiety, and you're not going to have any ability to enjoy your life and laugh about your mistakes and learn from them. And so what was your question? You answered mine.
Yeah. Did Jesus have anxiety?
He did. So it can't be a sin.
What specific scenarios would you give in Scripture that Jesus has anxiety?
Well, the clearest one is the night before he goes to the cross and dies for the sin of the world. First of all, it says that the disciples were all asleep and he was up all night. So you know you have anxiety when you can't even sleep. You're up all night. That's an indication of anxiety. And it said he was up all night praying over hours. Well, you know you're really burdened about something when you're like praying about it for hours. Most of us, we'll pray a few minutes about something. By 3 a.m., you're like, it's not that big of a deal. I'm going to bed. He's up all night and praying. And it says that he was sweating like drops of blood. And so medical doctors will call this condition hematidrosis. And that is where only under incredible distress and duress, the body has so much stress and anxiety that your capillaries begin to leak blood. It's a medical condition connected to stress and anxiety. So he's got emotional anxiety, he's got mental anxiety, he's got spiritual anxiety. Now it's manifesting as physical anxiety. And he's crying out to the Father, and he says, you know, I'm going to go to the cross and die. I'm paraphrasing. He says, take this from me. He's like, I don't want this. This is like somebody who's like, they're going in for surgery and they're having a panic attack. This is like somebody who, you know, is diagnosed with cancer and they're starting chemo and they're just completely stressed out. He's there. But he didn't sin. But it says in Hebrews that we have a high priest who can sympathize with us. So when we hit those moments, we could talk to Jesus and he's like, I've been there. I know what that's like because I was a real human being, fully God, fully man. I know what it's like to feel that weight of pressure to where physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, it's overwhelming and you don't know how to process it. Yeah. But the thing that Jesus did, he prayed and wrestled with God until he reached the point where he said, your will be done. And so the point is, all of us are going to hit those moments, and Jesus did, and it's not a sin if you pray through it and push through it and reach the point where you're like, I am freaked out. This is not what I want. I don't know what's going to happen. I am very stressed, but Lord, your will be done.
Yeah. I think 2 Peter, it's somewhere in chapter 5. I think it's verse 6 or 7. It says, cast your burdens on the Lord. And I think that's exactly what Jesus did in that moment. He had literally the weight of the world, the sins of the world on his shoulders. And he knew he was going to carry that cross and to die and be the sacrifice for us so that we could receive salvation through his blood. And he was bearing that burden. And that's such a fear of the future and a weight to bear. But he cast his burdens on the Father and asked humbly that if he would take it, that he would take it, and if not, that his will would be done. And I think that with anxiety, I know for me, a lot of the time I'll pray once or pray twice or pray for a minute or be like, God, could you just take this away or help me with this? But having that mental image of Jesus all night up sweating blood, like casting his burdens on the Lord, and ultimately his burdens weren't even taken away from him, and he still endured the cross. That says a lot to what it is to be a Christian and how to deal with anxiety.
Well, and for those who want to learn more about this, like, really spend some time in the Psalms. Yeah. And the Psalms, they are songs, but they're also, in large part, they're journal entries where specific people are in it. How many of you are creatives? You're songwriters, poets. Okay, I know you both are. So the Psalms are the creative's way of journaling. It's poetry and songwriting and storytelling to process things in real time. And so if you read the Psalms, you're like, they're dealing with fear or anxiety or depression or betrayal or loss, but they're very real. It's very raw. It's very emotional. But what they're doing, they're praying and worshiping and processing. It's a creative's way of working it through. Like those who are more like theological, they go to Romans. Those who are more creative, they'll go to like Proverbs or they'll go to the Psalms. And as you read the Psalms, the number one category, it's different genres of songwriting and poetry. The largest genre is lament. And it is, how do you unburden of anxiety and how do you process loss? Two things that if you don't know how to do, you're never going to be emotionally healthy. That's actually the biggest lion's share of the songs, of the 150 chapters in Psalms. That's the highest category. And then you think about Christian worship music today, is our biggest genre.
Emo Christian.
Yeah, I mean, well, but how to unburden, how to process, how to heal, how to forgive, how to emotionally heal. Instead, everything is just about sort of like cheery faking it or victory, victory, victory. And not every day is a good day, and not every day do you win.
Yeah, that's very valid. And I think that's a hard word to hear, but it's a true word. I have another less intense scenario of Jesus' life that I would like to ask if you think this may have been, reading into the text, but may have been an opportunity where Jesus had anxiety. At the wedding feast of Cana, when he's about to do his first miracle, and Mary approaches him, and she brings this anxiety to Jesus, and she says, they've run out of wine. Jesus, do something about it. And his response is, woman, do you not know it's not my time yet? Like, the time has not come. Do you think that was a time when Jesus may have experienced anxiety in his life?
So, yeah, it's interesting. So I'm a fan of something called Bowen family systems theory. He was not a Christian. A lot of Christians use it. But one of the things that it talks about is that emotions are contagious. But the most contagious emotion, the Bowen's family systems theory would say, is anxiety. If one person's anxious, it spreads really fast. And what happens is when there's anxiety and it spreads, you create something called triangles. So you have anxiety, usually in relation to another person, so then you tag a third person into the anxiety. We do this all the time. You're fighting with someone, so then you tag someone else in. Someone's got something going on, and it freaks you out, so you tag someone else in. What happened there was the family had anxiety. The weddings would go upwards of a week, and everybody would take time off, and it was like a camping trip.
Yeah, it's a feast, a festival. It's huge.
So the family's job was to provide the hospitality. And if you ran out, this was a public shame. And in Eastern culture, it's all about saving face. So if you're dealing with people from Asian countries or East Indian countries or Middle Eastern countries, two things are vital: saving face and not shaming the family. And I mean, if you shame your family, that's the worst. That is the worst. And so by running out of supplies, the whole family is now shamed. And so, the parents of the bride are like, oh my goodness, we failed our daughter. We publicly embarrassed her. We have not honored her. So there's anxiety in the family. Well, who do they tag in? Mary.
They get married.
They're like, Mary, we're freaking out. She's like, I'll get Jesus. There's a triangle.
Yeah.
The anxiety goes from the family to Mary. Mary's like, I got a son who does miracles. Let me tag him in. And so, but this is what happens is anxiety gets contagious. And so Mary caught the anxiety from the family, and then she gave it to Jesus. And Jesus is like, this isn't really my responsibility or my time. But he does love his mother, but now his mother's bossing him around. He also happens to be God. You want to honor your mother, but probably not let her boss you around if you happen to be the creator. So it's probably was a little bit.
This is my final favor. I love you, Mom, but
Mom, just
you're out of miracles.
I'll do you a solid, but going forward, I'm not doing refreshments, you know? And so, but that's what happens when we get anxiety. We pass it on, and we tend to pass it on to the people that we care about the most. And so what happens in an unhealthy relationship is two people just keep escalating anxiety or then triggering and bringing in a third person into the triangle. And you can think about it. There are certain friends that they only call you when they're having a catastrophe. Yeah. You're like, oh, must be a crisis. And what they want to do is they want to put their anxiety on you and then maybe tag somebody else in and then have two people help share their anxiety so they don't have to carry it themselves.
Until it multiplies, and then you got to get more people.
Well, then you get interlocking triangles.
Yeah.
And then you've got whole groups of people, and you're like, oh my gosh, now everybody's in our business. And with social media is where people with anxiety look for triangles.
Love it.
I'm freaking out. Who would like to freak out with me today? I'll freak out with you. And then we just create these interlocking triangles. And all that does is it just takes anxiety and it just makes it contagious. And so you think about it now, like, I think the thing that drives the algorithm on social media, and I think artificial intelligence has figured this out, the more anxiety, the more clicks.
Yeah.
So social media exists to increase anxiety, which means the longer you're on social media, statistically, it's verifiable, the worse your mental health. And if you just turn your phone off, you're like, I don't know, so I'm not freaking out.
Yeah.
Instead, I'll like eat a sandwich or walk the dog or take a nap or wash my car or do all of those or go hang out with my friend. Go, you know, and so there are other things you can do, but as long as you allow the technology and the algorithm to dominate your day, it literally exists to increase your anxiety, to get you then to the place where now you're looking for a therapist and a pill, and now you're up all night and you can't sleep, so now you're downloading a how to sleep app, and it's just like
never ending.
it just never ends.
Yeah. A follow-up question that you mentioned, like taking a pill. What would you say about prescription or medication for anxiety or depression?
I'm not a clinician, but I'd say don't start there.
Okay.
Mind, body, soul, spirit. It's like if you're filled with bitterness, you got to forgive. You know, if you're just a person that has a lot of unhealed hurt and trauma, so everything brings you anxiety, then we need to deal with that unhealed hurt and trauma. And if you have a physical problem, maybe it's hormonal or chemical, that may be diet or that may be nutrition to sort of regulate you. Some people it's very, very physical. I would say, you know, treat the whole person. Don't just start with medication. And also, if you get on it, if at all possible, have it be like physical therapy, something that helps you to heal and get tools so that it's not a lifelong dependence.
Yeah, that's good. Treating it as a tool instead of a savior, and not making it the primary means of fixing or changing.
Yeah, well, you think of it like so similarly, like let's say somebody has an addiction to drugs or alcohol. So you're like, we're going to give you a medication to come off the drugs and alcohol, but the goal is you're not going to be on this forever. If you're sort of addicted to adrenaline and cortisol because of anxiety, and you can be addicted to it, and that's why people get addicted to their phones. It's a little dopamine hit on the front of the brain. And it's a little shot of cortisol or adrenaline, and they get addicted to it. And the blue light doesn't help. It just accelerates the addiction. And so if it's like, well, we need to get you off of this addiction, but the goal is once you're off the addiction, you don't need it forever because now you've got new patterns of behavior.
Yeah, you don't have to replace your old addiction with a new one. You actually grow into health.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah. There was an old, I think it was an Anglican, he talked about the expulsive power of a new affection. And what he was talking about is if we have a bad habit and we stop it, we might just pick up a worse habit. So how do you take off a bad habit and pick up a good habit? You know, sort of take off and put on, to quote Paul. So it's like some people are like, you know, man, I was eating a lot and I stopped eating and I'm smoking. It's like, well, you know,
Sweet trade-off.
Yeah, sweet trade. You know, so you're skinnier and you have emphysema. You know, so. But you'll just see people, they'll go from sort of one compulsive bad habit to another. It's like, well, how do you take off the bad habit and put on the good habit? So if it's like, well, sometimes I get anxiety. Okay, well, when you get anxiety, do you have a process to then re-regulate yourself?
Yeah.
You know, that is, I turn off my phone, I go for a walk, I pray, I sing, you know, I reset. And until we get those habits in place, you're never quite healthy. And everything in our culture is really a quick fix. It's like, just do this, just drink that, just take that, just do, like, actually, life is not a quick fix. It's a series of healthy or unhealthy decisions, and a series of unhealthy decisions are not quickly fixed. It's going to take an ongoing habituation of healthy habits. Sleep, prayer, community, time in God's presence, worship, forgiving your enemies. Basic Christian stuff actually really helps just people to become more healthy and regulated.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so interesting because I feel like there's so many good habits that can be turned bad too. Like I was just thinking about how we were talking about music and how the Psalms are a lot of anxieties that have been written out and processed with the Lord and things like that. But it's so interesting how there's so much music out there that is negative because it's just the emotions and it's just the anxieties and just the anger and the sadness and the hatred. Like, someone going through a breakup, right, is going to listen to Taylor Swift because she's relatable. And people latch on to that. They latch on to things that are relatable and things that make them feel those emotions. And but then there's the good habits of writing a song that lets out your emotions, but it also brings glory to the Lord, and it brings praise to Him, and it's praising Him through your anxieties, and not just saying, I'm anxious, I'm just going to let it all out and be toxic, but it's instead turning that into praise, and yeah.
Well, yeah, and that's where the counselors talk a little bit about things like trauma bonds.
Yeah.
Like somebody has this trauma, somebody has this trauma, so they bond over it. It's like, well, but do they heal from it? And so, you can have anxiety bonds, you can have fear bonds, or you can have joy bonds. You can have health bonds. And so the question is, what we find is people either connect at the lowest or highest point of their journey, and that's where they choose people for the journey. And if you're like, I only hang out with people that have all been through this and are kind of stuck there. Like maybe the one that comes to mind most is like, bitter people that are stuck in bitterness, they find each other and they hang together.
Yeah.
And they just sort of reinforce their bitterness. And they become very toxic, very unhealthy, very unenjoyable. And if you say anything against them, it's like picking a fight with a gang. Like they are going to mob you because they just defend their bitterness. It's like, well, if your closest relationships are built on your trauma or your anxiety or your bitterness, those aren't people that are helping you to get out of it. Those are people that are ensuring that you stay in it. And do you find someone that's moving through it or move through it? They're like, I was there, but I'm in a process of forgiving, blessing my enemies because I'd like to move forward. Or, yeah, that was a horrible season and a terrible relationship, but I'm trying to see what I can learn from that because I want to move on from that. But part of the problem in your generation, and this is the result of bad therapy, your brokenness, your trauma, your abuse becomes your identity.
Yeah. I think you said it earlier, anxiety is psychological, and it literally has a connection to our identity. If we allow anxiety inside of us, then it's connected to us. It's part of our flesh, and it's psychologically built into us as who we are, as our identity.
Well, and so for me, like I deal with older guys that are alcoholics. We got a lot of them, real men. Guys that are, my name's so-and-so, and I'm an alcoholic. I'm like, how long has it been since you drank? 7 years. You're not an alcoholic. You're a Christian.
You're a really bad alcoholic if you haven't drank in 7 years.
But you're a Christian who struggles with alcohol, but the alcohol isn't your identity, it's your struggle.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ, his righteousness, his love for you, his adoption for you, his acceptance of you, his salvation of you, that's your identity. And so what we do is we take people's struggles and we make that their identity. It's like, well, your identity's never changing. So then you're locked in. All of a sudden you're like, well, I'm a person that has anxiety. It's like, you don't have to, you actually might not be in X number of years. That may be a struggle you have, but that doesn't necessarily need to be an identity you have. But the whole generation is struggling with identity. And what they're doing, they're looking in. How do I feel? What did I experience? What did I endure? Instead of looking out, who is my God and who does he declare me to be? And so once you know who you are, it starts to change how you live. once you define yourself by how you live, you can never change. And that's why people get so very violently defensive of their identity. This is who I am. It's like, well, the whole point of being a Christian is you change.
Yeah.
Like, that's the whole point.
Yeah, you die to yourself.
Yeah, you're born again. You're a new creation in Christ. Like, we reset the identity. And now whatever your struggles were, those may be your struggles, but they're not your identity. And your identity can overcome your struggle. And everybody's got their struggles.
Yeah, so that makes me think of a topic that you talk about sometimes, inner vows. So when someone makes an inner vow, it's them saying, like, I'm never gonna do this. I'm never gonna let someone hurt me again. I'm never gonna make this mistake, and things like that. And it becomes, as powerful as a vow that like controls their life, controls their every move, and causes anxieties. I forgot my question, but do you want to talk about inner vows a little bit?
And so, I don't know how long you want to go, son, but what happens so here's what happens. So can I explain your parents? How many of you grew up in a Christian home? All right, I'll explain. Here's your life. Here we go. So what happened was something bad happened to your mom or dad, and it really hurt them. And so they made a vow, an oath, a pledge. Jesus says don't make any vows. They made a vow or an oath or a pledge. This will never happen again. And then they created a legalism, a rule to protect them. And then you were born, and they love you, and they have anxiety and fear that you're going to experience what they experience. So to save you, they're going to give you their legalism, which is their vow. And once their vow gets put on you, that now becomes a generational curse.
So you're bound to the identity that they took on themselves.
From the brokenness that you weren't even present for.
That's awesome. Love that.
So let's say your mom, let's do this. I would ask, but we don't need to know your family's business. But like, let's say mom dated a really bad guy when she was 15, and it really hurt her. So she made a vow like, I'm never dating anyone until I'm in my 20s. That was her inner vow. Then she has a daughter. Guess what the inner vow is for the daughter?
Not dating until my 20s.
You can't date anyone until you're in your 20s.
Yeah, Emma.
Yeah, Emma. And so then what that is, though, that's how you get a legalism. Yeah. And the hard part for a child is usually the religious parent with the legalism, they do love their parent and they're seeking to save them, but they end up being the one that hurts them because they hold them so tight, they squeeze them. And so what happens is, let's say you've got a religious family for generations. Now you've got inner vows become external legalisms that then become generational curses. So then now the parents and the grandparents and the great-grandparents are just layering on all the rules, and it feels like control and fear and anxiety. And guess what those kids do? They rebel. They're like, I don't want to deal with any of this. This just seems too much. Too much control, too many rules, too many fears, too many anxieties. And now we've got generations of family struggles that are sort of hemming in my freedom, and so I'm rebelling.
Yeah, and then in that scenario too, like if they are rebelling and they're, dating when they're 14 or something, and they choose the wrong person, and then they get hurt, and so then it's just the cycle of, okay, you got hurt because you're dating secretly because you're not, that you're not supposed to, and then they end up getting even more hurt than when they would have.
Well, and if that happens, let's say a girl dates boy before 20, runs quietly, secretly, and then gets hurt and tells her mom. Now then they form a trauma bond, and then she comes under the legalism and says, yes, I need to give that to my daughter, and now grandma will help. So then in 20 years or 15 years, granddaughter's under the legalism that grandma had because mom violated it and got hurt. And so you just need to know where your parents are most controlling, where they're most anxious, where they're most fearful, where they're most legalistic and they're most religious. That's where they have the most pain. And they think that a vow will save them from the pain, and they think that the vow will save you as their child from the pain. And so the people that are the most religious are the most hurt, and they haven't healed from that. And so religious parents, usually the struggle in being a child of a religious parent is like, they really, really love me, and they're killing me. But they really love me, but they're killing me. And there is that tension there. Like, I do know they love me, but if I do everything they tell me, that's going to kill me. And so this is where the inner vows of a parent or a grandparent, they become a curse for the next generation. So like, let's say, for example, usually it's around dating, it's around whatever the case may be. Like, so for me, I grew up in a very dangerous, violent neighborhood and environment. And so for me, I have a lot of anxiety around safety, especially pertaining to women and children. And so for me, when the kids were growing up, my bent would have been lots of control and rules because I didn't want them to be hurt. But you can make so much control and rules that they don't have any joy or fun. They're safe, but they're not free. And I'll ask Zach permission to speak freely. If I would have made a lot of rules, what would you have done with them?
I would have broke them and rebelled.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what happens.
Yeah.
So sometimes the most rebellious kids come out of the most religious homes from parents who really love them but didn't heal and learn and got inner vows and legalisms and generational curses. And that's how you get deconstructionists. That's how you get the progressive Christians. That's how you get all the post-Christians, or I don't even know what we call them anymore.
Not Christians.
Yeah, but those are the kids that are just attacking and criticizing the church because all the rules and the abuse.
Yeah. Yeah, and then they see that as Jesus because they never actually knew Jesus. They knew the religion of control that their parents had to protect them from the fear of the future.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I guess last question, we'll transition into this. With anxiety and generational curses and bonds and trauma and things like this, there's a lot of issues pertaining to that and a lot of brokenness that I think everyone experiences. And we wanted to close talking about how to fight that and how to oppose anxiety. And one thing that Philippians talks about, Isaiah talks about it, I think Galatians talks about it as well. But it's the idea of gratitude and how gratitude is given to us by God to fight anxiety and to counter anxiety. So I want to hear your thoughts on that, and we can talk about that a little.
So fear is looking into the future like, I don't know what's going to happen. Gratitude is looking back going, you showed up. And so the more we look back before we look forward, it can help to neutralize the fear.
Yeah, I like to say that remembrance leads to expectance.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I'll probably use it in a sermon, so thank you.
Go for it.
So like I take a weekly prayer hike every week in the woods generally, and I like silence and solitude. I turn my phone off. I like being outside.
You're crazy.
I need
Crazy.
fresh air. Yeah, fresh air, sunshine. The baby deer were just born in Prescott. They're running all over. It's awesome. And so for me, my hike, I begin my hike every week with gratitude and thankfulness. And I just verbal process with the Lord everyone and everything that I'm grateful for. And then on the hike out from wherever I go, it's people and things that I'm making requests for. And what I find is if I start with thankfulness and gratitude, then as I'm praying for people and things, I don't have as much anxiety, but I have more expectancy.
Yeah, it puts your burdens in perspective.
Yeah, God, thank you for these 27 things. Here's 3 I'm a little worried about. But in light of the fact that I just reminded myself of the 27 things you've knocked out, I'm feeling a little better about these 3. If I don't thank God for those 27 and all I'm focused on is these 3, I'll have anxiety instead of expectancy. And so part of this as well, and this will be I think this is a massive lesson. The providence of God is one of the most anxiety-lifting truths in the Bible. And the providence of God is 2 things. God is sovereign and he's good. If God is good but he's not sovereign, he's like a friend who cares but he can't really help. If God is sovereign but he's not good, that's like a bully or a dictator. If God is sovereign and good, then that's awesome because like he's for me and he's above it all. And sometimes when you're young, it's hard to really trust in the providence of God, but the longer you live, you just see it. You know, like your mom grew up in a Christian home. I didn't. And so when I met your mom, we started dating, I would freak out all the time. Like my spiritual gift was freaking out. I would freak out about everything. And she'd be like, what? The Lord has us. I'm like, of course he doesn't. That's why I'm here, to save us. And so your mom doesn't, would you agree, like your mom doesn't have nearly the amount of anxiety as your dad?
She's just carefree. I don't know how or why, but
Yeah. She tells me, like, ever since I was a little girl, I've just seen God's providence just protect him. I've seen him provide. He's worked it out. And for me as a new Christian, I was like, I don't know that. And so, but it's trusting, you know what? God, you're in it, and you're going to lead me through it. And even if it doesn't go well, somehow you're going to use it on the other side, and you're going to straighten out whatever is currently crooked. And so for me, it's gratitude and thankfulness about the past, and then it's providence of God for the future, and then it leads to expectancy to see how he's going to provide. And this doesn't mean it's all going to work out. It's going to be easy. You're going to get what you want. But I would say most people only talk to God when they're in a crisis. And they forget all the times that he was present and he delivered and he spoke, not just for them, but also for their families. So like in the Old Testament, they had the stones of remembrance. And when God would like do something big, they would literally build a little monument to remind them.
yeah, and that was like a joy bond for their children. Because Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, they all built those altars, those Ebenezers, those stones of remembrance. And then when their kids would walk by those stacks of rocks, they'd be like, Dad, what's that? And it's like, that's when I wrestled with God. That's what Jacob could say. That's when I wrestled with God, and I built that altar, and that's why I limp. And then their kids could tell that story, and it was joy bonds, which is a crazy, mind-blowing thing.
Well, and in that, then, what you're doing is you're taking faith and you're passing it on to generations so that one generation's faith gets passed on, and maybe this generation's is stronger, and then this generation's is stronger, and you can either pass on faith or anxiety. And if you don't tell the stories about God's faithfulness, your kids don't know that he's faithful. And if you do tell the stories, they're like, oh, my God's been showing up for like great-grandpa, like he's got a pile of rocks. He told me all the stories. Like our God shows up. And then you look into the future with expectancy more than anxiety. And honestly, son, when you were growing up, we're over time, we'll close, but I brought a lot of anxiety into the home. And I publicly apologize for that as your dad. That's not what I was a new Christian, and I had like fear and anxiety, like responsibility. What does the future hold? How do I pastor? How do I love my family? How do I lead my family? How do I provide? And then people bring their anxiety. And as a pastor, like you're the lightning rod for everybody's anxiety. And so
You were the third person in that triangle.
I was in all the triangles. But then what I would do is I would bring the anxiety home. And then what I didn't know at the time that I now know, and I wish I would have known as a younger man, by bringing the anxiety home, now I'm making you in the triangle, and I'm bringing the anxiety to you, and I'm bringing the anxiety to your sister and your siblings and all of that. And so for me, what I should have been doing is I should have been spending more time talking about God's providence, God's provision, God showing up, all the ways. And I think as I got more mature, you guys got a little more of that.
Yeah.
And I think for the kids that are a little younger, they got a little more of that. But that was that was a lesson. Even though I knew the Bible, I don't think as a husband and a father early on, I don't think I succeeded at that. I think I failed pretty mightily at that. And now, that you've got, you've got the grandkids, my hope, like with your kids, is to not bring anxiety, but to bring...
You just bring toys.
Toys and gratitude and faithfulness of God's stories so that they have expectancy about their future instead of anxiety about their future. And so, I'm sorry that you didn't have a better version of your dad when you were younger, and I promise you I'm going to do better for your kids. And that needs to just, every generation has got to try to lean into how do we make it better for the next.
Another thing about gratitude, I'd say, is someone told me this like a long time ago, but like what you were talking about, like when you have, that thing that's making you anxious, the thing that you're bringing to the Lord, when you first start out with looking back and having gratitude and thanking Him for all of the things, for His provision and all the things that He's given you. Someone told me a long time ago, like, you can be thankful for the things in the future too, because He is faithful and because He will always provide. And so rather than saying like, God, deliver me from this is hard, but being like, God, thank you that you are going to deliver me through this. And thank you for always, walking alongside me. And thank you for always being there in the future.
I think you're right. I think it's a great perspective. And I think faith is gratitude in advance.
Yeah.
Faith is gratitude before it's sight. And like, we can close with this because we're over time, but like when we moved here, like you guys don't know, we moved here almost 10 years ago now, and a tree fell on our house in the other state, and all of our possessions were in it. It sheared our bedroom off the house. It split our bed in the middle. It was a Saturday morning. So if we would have been home, you would be without a mom and a dad. We'd be dead. And now I'm in my 40s. I got 5 kids. We're in another state. We don't have any family. We don't know anybody. My house has got a tree on it, like deer are in my house. All my stuff is in my house. I was like, I am officially DEFCON 5 freaking out. And your mom, I was like, I'll never forget one night, I was laying in bed freaking out. Your mom was snoring. Okay, that's the difference between me and your mom. And so I finally woke her up. I was like, why are you not freaking out? She's like, I'm just really excited to see how the Lord figures this out.
Aww. That's so cool.
Well, yeah, see, you're the girl, so you think that's cool. But but now that it's 10 years later, he figured it all out. And me freaking out didn't help.
Really?
Yeah, and so, for Grace, the problems were opportunities for God to show up, and for me, they were anxieties to carry. And that was my failure. And so there's been times in my life, I've had trouble sleeping, I've had anxiety for sure, I've had intestinal ulcers. I blew out my adrenal glands as a young man because just the fight or flight, I live in fight. There was one season where most of the people in the church thought I was flirting with them because I was always winking. I wasn't flirting. I was just very stressed out. And so, your body starts to tell you that you're not doing so good. And even as a younger man, when I got some of those indicators, your body's like, hey, check engine light on. I just kept going. And your mom would just snore. And so she was a person that trusted in the providence of God. And sometimes you trust in the providence of God when you sleep, and when then you're awake, you're joyful.
That's a good indicator. I'm going to try and do that more.
Sleep more and laugh more. That's probably somebody who trusts God.
I'm all for it. That sounds like my son. He just sleeps and laughs. So
Yeah.
apparently he's joyful. We'll close with this. We talked about it, some of my team, earlier this week, and I had to Google it to make sure it was real. And thanks to Google, I found the studies from the government, so it's official.
Oh, it's got to be true. Yeah.
But there's been studies done in the past 2 years that say in your brain, when you have the emotion or attitude of gratefulness and thanksgiving, it's a either or. Your brain cannot also be anxious. It's one or the other. And I just think that's a beautiful thing that the world and science tie it back to the beginning when you were talking about sola scriptura. The truth of the world, the studies and research that they're finding through science is catching up with the Word of God. And it took a while, but we're getting there.
Don't be anxious in anything, but in everything with prayer and supplication with thanksgiving. Make your requests known to God, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your heart and your mind in Christ Jesus. And so it talks about when the anxiety comes, it's praying and thankfulness that then literally causes us to work out of a different side of our brain. But if people don't know Jesus and they don't have the Holy Spirit, they don't even know that's a possibility. And to me, that's where God's people have this unique set of resources that no one else has to return to joy. And I'll close with this. So before sin entered the world, all we had was joy and gratitude. And then sin comes. Now we have fear and guilt and anxiety. We weren't built for fear, guilt, and anxiety. We were built for joy and gratitude. And so when everything is done and Jesus returns and the curse is lifted, all we're going to have is joy and gratitude. We're going to look back at the past with gratitude, and we're going to look forward to the future with joy.
Yeah.
And so what that means is that literally the way God built us, if we live in this, we destroy ourselves, and we weren't built for that. And so if we return to joy and gratitude, then we are literally returning to the way that God hardwired us and that we will be forever and ever and ever. And so that must mean that this is actually who we are. And when we're acting in this, we're not being true to our identity and who God made us to be, so we need to return to this. So, we're going to get here, but you can't move here. You got to get back to here.
Yeah. That's so good. I think we'll close with that.
Hey, Zach Driscoll here. Just wanted to thank you for taking the time to listen to the podcast on a biblical view of anxiety. I hope and pray that it was helpful for you and built up your faith. Be on the lookout for new content in the future, and we'll see you guys next time.